In the shadow of her sister's cruelty, Cordelia believed she was destined for loneliness. But when a humble farmer saw her worth, she discovered that true love doesn't come from beauty. It comes from the heart. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Millbrook like a whispered secret, shrouding the grand estate in an ethereal veil that seemed to promise both beauty and sorrow. Cordelia Ashworth stood at the tall windows of the manor's drawing room, her fingers tracing the cold glass as she watched the sun struggle to break through the grey clouds. The house behind her buzzed with the familiar sounds of preparation, servants hurrying through corridors, silver clinking against porcelain, and the sharp clicking of her stepmother's heels across the marble floors. Today marked the autumn harvest celebration, an annual tradition that brought the finest families from 3 counties to Millbrook Manor. The estate, with its sprawling gardens and ancient oak trees, had been in the Ashworth family for generations. Yet for Cordelia, the grand halls felt more like a beautiful prison than a home. "Cordelia, step away from that window this instant." The voice cut through the morning quiet like a blade. Vivienne Ashworth swept into the room, her silk gown rustling with each calculated step. Where Cordelia moved with quiet grace, Vivienne commanded attention with every gesture. Her hair was perfectly arranged in the latest fashion, her dress cut from the finest fabrics that money could procure. She was everything society deemed beautiful, and she wielded that beauty like a weapon. Cordelia turned slowly, her hands folding before her simple morning dress, a pale blue cotton that had seen better seasons. The contrast between the sisters was stark and intentional. Vivienne made certain of that. "The guests will arrive within the hour," Vivienne continued, settling herself on the velvet settee with practiced elegance. "Mother has asked me to ensure you understand your position at today's gathering." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Cordelia felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the weight of expectations she could never meet, pressing down upon her shoulders. Their stepmother, Mrs. Helena Ashworth, had made her feelings abundantly clear since marrying into the family. Cordelia was the daughter of the first wife, a woman who had died when Cordelia was barely past her childhood. Vivienne was Helena's treasure, the daughter who would secure the family's social standing through an advantageous marriage. "I understand, Vivienne," Cordelia replied softly, her voice barely disturbing the heavy air between them. She had learned long ago that resistance only prolonged the humiliation. But Vivienne was not finished. She rose gracefully, moving closer until she stood directly before her sister. The scent of expensive French perfume filled the space between them, cloying and overwhelming. "Do you truly understand, dear sister? Because I fear you harbor certain delusions about your prospects." Cordelia's heart began to beat faster, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. She had perfected the art of hiding her emotions behind a mask of quiet acceptance. It was the only protection she had in this house of beautiful cruelties. "The Whitmore family will be attending today," Vivienne continued, her voice taking on a sweetly poisonous tone. "Their son, Edward, has recently returned from his European tour. Mother believes he might be suitable for someone in our family." She paused, letting the implications settle like dust on expensive furniture. "Naturally, she means me." The morning light streaming through the windows seemed to dim, casting longer shadows across the ornate carpet. Cordelia nodded, unsurprised by this revelation. Edward Whitmore was heir to considerable wealth and property. Of course he would be intended for Vivienne. "But I wanted to speak with you," Vivienne said, circling her sister like a predator studying its prey, "because I've noticed how you watch the young men at these gatherings, how you stand by the windows, dreaming your little dreams." Her laugh was like silver bells, beautiful and cold. "It pains me to see you torture yourself with such impossible hopes." Cordelia's hands trembled slightly, but she kept them clasped tightly together. "I harbor no such hopes, Vivienne." "Oh, but you do," Vivienne whispered, leaning closer. Her voice dropped to barely above a breath, making her words feel intimate and devastating. "I can see it in your eyes. The way you imagine that someone someday might overlook what you are and see something worthy of love." The words struck Cordelia like physical blows. She felt the color drain from her cheeks, felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. This was Vivian's greatest talent, finding the deepest vulnerabilities and pressing upon them with surgical precision. "But darling sister," Vivian continued, her voice now rising to its normal pitch, ensuring the servants in the hallway could hear, "we must face the truth. You are plain, you have no dowry of consequence, and your manner is far too simple for refined society. You'll never be loved, not truly, not the way a woman dreams of being loved." The final words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that seemed to spread through Cordelia's entire being. She stood frozen, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted and cracked. "I tell you this, not to be cruel," Vivian added, smoothing her skirts with satisfied hands, "but to spare you the greater pain of false hope. It's better to accept your station now than to spend your life yearning for what can never be." The grandfather clock in the corner chimed the hour, its deep tones echoing through the room like a funeral bell. Cordelia remained silent, her mind reeling from the calculated cruelty of her sister's words. Outside, she could hear the distant sound of carriages beginning to arrive on the gravel drive, bringing the families who would celebrate the harvest, while she served as a reminder of everything she could never become. Vivian moved toward the door, pausing only to deliver her final strike. "Mother expects you to assist with the children during dinner. It suits your particular talents." With that, she glided from the room, leaving behind only the lingering scent of perfume and the crushing weight of words that cut deeper than any blade ever could. Cordelia stood alone in the drawing room, surrounded by luxury that had never belonged to her, feeling smaller and more invisible than ever before. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, flooding the room with golden light that seemed to mock her darkness. In the distance, she could hear laughter and conversation beginning to fill the house, the sounds of a world in which she would always be an outsider looking in. The afternoon had settled over Millbrook Manor like a heavy blanket, warm and suffocating despite the approaching autumn. Cordelia had escaped the grand dining hall, where distinguished guests feasted on roasted pheasant and spoke in voices that carried the confidence of inherited wealth. Her assigned duty of minding the children had been completed with efficiency, if not joy. She had read them stories in the library, while their parents discussed politics and marriages over crystal goblets of wine. Now, she found herself walking the familiar path that led away from the manor's manicured gardens toward the wilder edges of the estate. Here, ancient stone walls divided the formal grounds from the working farmland that sustained the family's wealth. The contrast was stark. On one side, perfectly trimmed hedges and imported roses. On the other, fields of golden wheat swaying in the late afternoon breeze. Cordelia had always preferred this boundary between two worlds. It felt honest in a way that the manor's opulent rooms never could. She walked along the weathered stone wall, her simple dress trailing through wild grass that grew thick and green in the shadow of the barrier. The sounds of the harvest celebration faded behind her, replaced by the gentle whisper of wind through grain and the distant lowing of cattle. She paused where the wall had crumbled in places, creating natural steps that had served as her secret passage since childhood. Through the gap, she could see the Thornfield farm spread across the valley below. Modest buildings with smoke rising from chimneys, fields marked by neat furrows, and a sense of purposeful activity that spoke of honest labor rather than inherited privilege. "Careful there, miss. Those stones are less steady than they appear." The voice startled her so completely that she nearly lost her footing on the uneven wall. Cordelia turned to find a man standing perhaps 20 paces away, his work-worn hands holding the reins of a chestnut mare. He was tall and lean, with the kind of sun-weathered face that spoke of days spent in open fields rather than drawing rooms. His clothing was simple but clean. Dark trousers, a white shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a vest that had seen honest wear. What struck her most, however, was his expression. Where she had grown accustomed to looks of dismissal or calculated appraisal, this stranger regarded her with something she rarely encountered, genuine concern. I'm quite steady," she managed, though her heart was beating rapidly from the surprise of his appearance. "I've walked this path many times." He smiled then, and the expression transformed his entire face. It was not the practiced smile of social necessity that she knew from the manor's gatherings, but something warm and unguarded. "I imagine you have. I've seen you walking here before, though we've never been properly introduced." He released the mare's reins, allowing her to graze on the wild grass, and took a step closer. "I'm Nathaniel Hayes. I work the Thornfield land." Cordelia felt a flush creep up her neck. She had been observed during her solitary walks, caught in moments when she believed herself invisible. The thought should have embarrassed her, but something in his tone suggested no judgment, only a quiet acknowledgement of shared space. "Cordelia Ashworth," she replied softly, then added with practiced humility, "from the manor." "Yes, I know." His response surprised her. Most people, when they learned she was from the big house, either became obsequious or distant. Nathaniel simply nodded, as if the information was interesting but not particularly important. "You walk as if these fields bring you peace. That speaks well of your character." The comment was so unexpected that Cordelia found herself staring at him. When was the last time anyone had remarked on her character in terms that weren't diminishing? She struggled to find an appropriate response, her mind still reeling from Vivian's cruel words that morning. "The celebration at the manor must be grand today," Nathaniel continued, seemingly unaware of her internal turmoil. He gestured toward the distant sounds of laughter and music. "The whole county's been talking about it for weeks." "Yes," Cordelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Very grand." Something in her tone must have betrayed more than she intended, because Nathaniel's expression grew thoughtful. He studied her face with the kind of attention she was unaccustomed to receiving, not searching for flaws or calculating her worth, but simply seeing her. "You don't sound particularly enthusiastic about grand celebrations," he observed gently. "I would have thought a young lady from such a fine family would be at the center of it all." Cordelia felt a bitter smile tug at the corners of her mouth. "I'm afraid I'm not suited for being at the center of anything, Mr. Hayes." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, carrying with it all the weight of the morning's humiliation. She immediately regretted her candor, expecting to see pity or awkward discomfort cross his features. Instead, Nathaniel frowned as if her statement was simply incorrect. "That's a curious thing to say about yourself," he said thoughtfully. "In my experience, the people who claim to be unsuited for attention are often the most deserving of it." His mare lifted her head from the grass and nickered softly, as if agreeing with her master's assessment. The sound made Cordelia smile despite herself, a genuine expression that felt foreign after the morning's trials. "Your horse seems to have strong opinions," she said, grateful for the lighter turn in conversation. "Luna has excellent judgment when it comes to people," Nathaniel replied, patting the mare's neck with obvious affection. "She's never wrong about character, and she appears to approve of you." As if to prove his point, the horse took several steps closer to the wall where Cordelia stood, extending her neck in a gesture of curious friendship. Without thinking, Cordelia reached out to stroke the soft nose, marveling at the animal's gentle demeanor. "She's beautiful," Cordelia murmured, feeling some of the day's tension begin to ease as Luna nuzzled her palm. "Beautiful and intelligent," Nathaniel agreed. "Much like yourself, I imagine." The words hit Cordelia like a physical shock. She jerked her hand back from the horse, staring at Nathaniel with wide eyes. No one had ever called her beautiful, not even in the casual, meaningless way that society sometimes demanded. Vivian's words from that morning echoed in her mind. "You are plain. You'll never be loved." That's very kind, but..." And she stammered, backing away from the wall. But you've been told otherwise, Nathaniel finished quietly. His voice held a note of understanding that made her chest tight. Someone has convinced you that you're less than you are. The perception was so accurate, so gently delivered, that Cordelia felt tears threatening to spill over. She turned away, unwilling to let this stranger see her cry, unwilling to confirm what must already be obvious about her circumstances. "Miss Ashworth," Nathaniel said softly, "would you permit me to say something that might sound presumptuous?" When she didn't respond, he continued anyway. "I've lived in this valley all my life. I've seen the grand ladies come and go from that manor, dressed in silks and surrounded by admirers. But in all that time, I've never seen anyone walk these fields with the grace you possess. There's something in the way you move through this world, like you understand its beauty in a way others miss." Cordelia closed her eyes, fighting against the hope his words kindled in her chest. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to the kind of dreams that Vivienne had so expertly shattered that morning. "I should return," she whispered. "I'll be missed." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. No one would miss her presence at the celebration. Her absence would likely go unnoticed entirely. "Of course," Nathaniel said simply. "But Miss Ashworth, if you ever find yourself walking this way again, I hope you'll feel free to stop and talk. Luna and I would welcome the company." The following weeks brought an unexpected rhythm to Cordelia's days. Each afternoon, when the manor fell into its customary post-luncheon quiet, she found herself drawn to the stone wall that separated her world from Nathaniel's. What had begun as chance encounters evolved into something more deliberate, a shared understanding that neither spoke aloud but both anticipated with growing warmth. Nathaniel was unlike any man she had ever known. Where the gentlemen of her social circle spoke in calculated phrases designed to impress or intimidate, he conversed with an honesty that was both refreshing and unnerving. He asked her opinions on matters both trivial and profound, listened to her responses as if they held genuine value, and shared stories of his life with an openness that made her feel trusted in return. On this particular afternoon, autumn had painted the countryside in shades of amber and crimson. Cordelia arrived at their usual meeting place to find Nathaniel waiting beneath the great oak that stood guard over the boundary wall. He had spread a worn blanket over the grass and was arranging what appeared to be a simple picnic, bread, cheese, and apples fresh from his orchard. "You're early today?" she observed, settling carefully on the edge of the blanket, mindful of keeping proper distance, even as her heart raced at his thoughtfulness. "I finished my work in the North Field sooner than expected," he replied, offering her a piece of bread still warm from his cottage kitchen. "Mrs. Patterson, my neighbour, insisted I take some of her fresh butter. She claims it's the finest in 3 counties. Cordelia accepted the food with a smile that came more easily now than it had in weeks. "Mrs. Patterson has strong opinions about her dairy, I take it?" "Strong opinions about everything," Nathaniel laughed, and the sound sent warmth through her chest. "She's appointed herself the unofficial guardian of unmarried men in the valley. According to her, we're all in desperate need of proper feeding and sensible wives." The mention of marriage created a moment of awkward silence. Cordelia felt the familiar weight of reality pressing down upon their gentle companionship. She was the daughter of Millbrook Manor. He was a tenant farmer. Their stations in life might as well have been separated by oceans rather than a simple stone wall. "Miss Ashworth," Nathaniel said softly, as if reading her thoughts, "may I ask you something that might be considered improper?" She nodded, though her pulse quickened with apprehension. "Are you promised to anyone? Engaged or expected to be?" The question hung between them like a bird uncertain of its perch. Cordelia stared down at her hands, feeling the complexity of her answer twist in her chest. "No," she said finally, "I am not promised to anyone, nor am I likely to be. Because of your family's expectations for your sister." His perception continued to astound her. She looked up to find him watching her with that same gentle intensity that had marked their first meeting. "Among other reasons," she admitted. "Vivienne is Everything a young lady of good breeding should be. Beautiful, accomplished, charming. I am—" She struggled to find words that wouldn't sound like self-pity. "You are kind," Nathaniel said firmly. "You are intelligent, thoughtful, and possess a grace that has nothing to do with artificial accomplishments. You see beauty in simple things, the way light falls across a field, the sound wind makes through wheat. These are not lesser qualities, Miss Ashworth. They are rarer and more precious than anything that can be taught by masters." Heat rose in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the unfamiliar experience of being truly seen and valued. "You hardly know me, Mr. Hayes." "I know enough," he replied. "I know that you choose to walk alone rather than surround yourself with empty flattery. I know that you speak to my horse as if she were a dear friend rather than a mere animal. I know that when you smile, truly smile, it changes everything about your face, makes the whole world seem brighter." Cordelia felt tears prick at her eyes. But these were different from the tears Vivian's cruelty had provoked. These came from a deep well of longing she had barely acknowledged, even to herself. "Mr. Hayes, Nathaniel, what you're suggesting, it's impossible." "Why?" The question was simple, direct, carrying no challenge but genuine curiosity. "Because I am an Ashworth, and you are—" She gestured helplessly toward the fields beyond. "A farmer," he finished without any trace of shame. "A man who works with his hands, who earns his bread through labor rather than inheritance. Is that what makes it impossible?" The pain in his voice cut through her heart like a blade. She had not meant to wound him, had not intended to echo the prejudices that had shaped her entire life. "It's not what I believe," she said urgently, "but it's what the world believes, what my family would demand, what society would never accept." Before Nathaniel could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the intimate quiet of their conversation. They turned to see a rider cresting the hill that led from the manor, Vivian, mounted on her prized black stallion, her riding habit perfectly tailored, and her expression cold with fury. "Cordelia!" Vivian's voice carried across the distance like a whip crack. "What in heaven's name are you doing?" Cordelia scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. In her haste, she caught her skirt on a rough stone and heard the fabric tear, a sound that seemed to echo her growing panic. Nathaniel rose more slowly, his expression carefully controlled, as Vivian approached. She reined in her horse just beyond the stone wall, close enough that her mount's hooves scattered dust across their makeshift picnic. "Well?" Vivian demanded, her gaze moving between Cordelia and Nathaniel with obvious disgust. "I demand an explanation for this spectacle." "There is no spectacle," Cordelia managed, though her voice shook. "I was simply walking, and we happened to what? Take tea with a farmhand?" Vivian's laugh was sharp and cutting. "Do you have any idea how this appears? A daughter of Millbrook Manor consorting with—" She gestured dismissively at Nathaniel, who remained silent but whose jaw had tightened with controlled anger. "Miss Ashworth has done nothing improper," Nathaniel said quietly. "If there is fault to be found, it lies with me for presuming—" "You will not speak unless addressed," Vivian snapped, "and you will certainly not speak to defend my sister's inexcusable behavior." The casual cruelty in Vivian's tone ignited something fierce in Cordelia's chest. For the first time in her life, she felt anger on behalf of someone else overriding her own fear. "He has been nothing but respectful," she said, her voice gaining strength. "More respectful than—" "Than what?" Vivian's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Than the gentlemen of our own class? Than those who might actually be suitable matches for an Ashworth daughter?" She leaned forward in her saddle, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Have you forgotten our conversation already, dear sister? Have you forgotten what I told you about your prospects?" The words from that morning weeks ago came flooding back. "You'll never be loved. Not truly. Not the way a woman dreams of being loved." "Perhaps," Vivian continued, straightening with cruel satisfaction, You've begun to believe that desperation might be mistaken for affection, that a farmer might settle for damaged goods if the alternative is nothing at all. Cordelia felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, she heard Nathaniel's sharp intake of breath, saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. "That is enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Vivian laughed again, delighted by the reaction she had provoked. "How gallant! Tell me, farmer, do you imagine yourself some sort of romantic hero? Do you think your noble intentions can overcome the simple reality of what she is, a spinster with no dowry, no prospects, and no hope of anything better than charity?" The words landed like physical blows, each one designed to cut deeper than the last. Cordelia watched as everything she had begun to hope for crumbled around her, as the light that Nathaniel had kindled in her heart was systematically extinguished by her sister's merciless precision. "Cordelia," Vivian commanded, her voice returning to its normal pitch, "you will return to the manor immediately. Mother wishes to speak with you about your recent absences." With that, she wheeled her horse around and galloped back toward the estate, leaving behind only the settling dust and the ruins of an afternoon that had promised so much. The walk back to Millbrook Manor felt like a funeral march. Each step on the familiar gravel path carried Cordelia further from the brief happiness she had discovered and deeper into the suffocating reality of her circumstances. The afternoon sun, which had seemed so warm and welcoming just moments before, now felt harsh and exposing, as if it too had turned against her. Helena Ashworth was waiting in the morning room, her silver hair arranged in perfect waves and her expression carved from ice. She stood beside the tall windows that overlooked the formal gardens, her hands clasped behind her back in a pose that Cordelia recognized as dangerous. Vivian lounged in the burgundy armchair nearby, her riding habit exchanged for an afternoon dress of deep green silk that emphasized her triumphant bearing. "Sit down, Cordelia." Helena's voice could have frozen summer rain. "We have much to discuss." Cordelia remained standing near the doorway, her torn skirt a visible reminder of her transgression. She had learned long ago to gauge the severity of her punishments by the careful control in her stepmother's tone. This measured calm promised something far worse than raised voices or immediate anger. "Vivian has shared some disturbing information about your recent activities," Helena continued, turning from the window to fix her stepdaughter with a stare that could have withered roses. "Activities that bring shame upon this family and demonstrate a shocking lack of judgment on your part." "Mother," Cordelia began, but Helena raised a single finger, silencing her as effectively as a shout. "You will speak when I permit it, and not before." Helena moved to the writing desk that dominated one corner of the room, withdrawing a letter from its polished surface. "This morning, I received correspondence from the Whitmore family. They have formally requested permission to court Vivian with the intention of announcing an engagement before Christmas." Cordelia felt her heart sink, though this news should not have surprised her. The Whitmores represented everything Helena valued: wealth, social standing, and the kind of connections that elevated a family's position in society. "However," Helena continued, her tone growing even more frigid, "such an alliance requires certain assurances about the reputation and behavior of all family members. The Whitmores are a discerning family. They will not tolerate any association with scandal or impropriety." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Cordelia understood perfectly. Her behavior threatened not only her own future, but Vivian's carefully orchestrated match. "Do you understand what your selfishness has potentially cost us?" Helena demanded. "Your sister's happiness, our family's standing, the security of our position in society, all placed at risk because you chose to indulge in romantic fantasies with a common laborer." "He is not common," Cordelia said quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian's eyes widened with delighted shock, while Helena's face transformed into something truly terrible to behold. "You dare to contradict me?" Helena's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You dare to defend this breach of everything decent and proper?" "I defend an honorable man who has shown me nothing but kindness," Cordelia replied, her voice gaining strength from desperation. "Something I have rarely experienced in this house." The words were out before she could consider their consequences. 20 years of suppressed hurt and resentment poured forth in that single sentence, shattering the careful facade of dutiful submission she had maintained for so long. Helena's hand connected with Cordelia's cheek with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. The blow sent her stumbling backward, her hand flying to her burning face in shock. "How dare you?" Helena hissed. "How dare you speak of this family, my family, with such ingratitude? After everything we have provided for you, everything we have sacrificed to maintain your position in society despite your limitations." Tears stung Cordelia's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here, not in front of them. You have a choice to make," Helena continued, her breathing heavy with anger. "You will cease all contact with this farmer immediately. You will comport yourself with the dignity befitting an Ashworth daughter, and you will accept the arrangement I have made for your future." "Arrangement?" Cordelia's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Reverend Morrison has agreed to take you as his wife," Helena announced, with the satisfaction of a chess player delivering checkmate. "He is a widower in need of a housekeeper and someone to care for his elderly mother. In exchange, he offers respectability and removes you from this household before you can cause further damage to your sister's prospects." The room seemed to spin around Cordelia. Reverend Morrison was a man of at least 50 years, dour and humorless, who spoke of little beyond duty and divine judgment. The thought of spending her life tending to his household, bearing his children, submitting to his rigid interpretation of a woman's role, it was a fate worse than the loneliness she had known. "I cannot," she whispered. "You cannot?" Vivian laughed, the sound bright and cruel. "Dear sister, you seem to forget that you have no other options. No other man will have you. Certainly not after word spreads about your inappropriate behavior with that farmer. And word will spread," Helena added with cold precision, "unless you accept this arrangement willingly. The choice is yours, Cordelia. Marriage to a respectable man of God, or ruin and disgrace that will follow you wherever you might try to flee." The trap was perfect, engineered with the kind of heartless efficiency that Helena wielded like an art form. Cordelia saw her future stretching before her. Years of grey submission, of slow death by 1,000 small cruelties, of never again feeling the warmth she had discovered in Nathaniel's presence. "I need time to consider," she managed. "You have until tomorrow morning," Helena declared. "Reverend Morrison expects an answer when he calls after Sunday service. And Cordelia," her voice carried a final, poisonous warning, "if you attempt to contact that farmer again, if you so much as look in the direction of his property, I will ensure that he loses his lease on the Thornfield land. His family has worked that farm for 3 generations. It would be unfortunate if your selfishness cost them their livelihood." The threat struck Cordelia like a physical blow. She understood now the true scope of Helena's power, the devastating reach of her stepmother's influence. Even rebellion would only bring suffering to the one person who had shown her genuine affection. That evening, as rain began to patter against her bedroom windows, Cordelia sat in the window seat that had been her refuge since childhood. The familiar comfort of the space felt hollow now, tainted by the impossible choice that lay before her. Below, she could see the lights of the Thornfield farmhouse twinkling in the distance, each warm glow a reminder of what she was being forced to sacrifice. A soft knock at her door broke through her despair. She turned to find one of the younger housemaids, Mary, barely 16 and still possessed of the kind of hope that Cordelia remembered having once upon a time. "Begging your pardon, miss," Mary whispered, glancing nervously down the corridor, "but there's someone asking for you at the kitchen door. Says he has something that belongs to you." Died. Cordelia's heart stopped. She knew, without being told, who waited in the darkness beyond the servants' entrance. The question was whether she had the courage to face him, knowing what she would have to say. The kitchen door opened to reveal Nathaniel, standing in the gentle rain, his hat in his hands and his face etched with concern. Water dripped from his dark hair, and his work clothes were dampened from the ride to the manor, but his eyes held the same warmth that had first captivated Cordelia weeks ago. "Miss Ashworth," he said softly, his voice carrying over the sound of raindrops against the cobblestones. "I had to come. I had to know that you were unharmed after what happened today." Cordelia's heart twisted at the sight of him. She stepped into the shadowed alcove beside the kitchen door, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The space was barely large enough for both of them, and his nearness made her pulse race even as her mind screamed warnings about the danger of this meeting. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, though every fiber of her being was grateful that he had. "If they discover you here—" "Let them discover me," Nathaniel replied with quiet intensity. "I won't let your sister's poison be the last word between us. I won't let you believe the lies she spoke about your worth." Tears threatened to spill over as Cordelia looked into his face. "Perhaps they weren't lies. Perhaps she spoke only the truth, that I am damaged goods, that no one could truly love someone like me." Nathaniel's hands rose to cup her face gently, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had begun to fall despite her efforts to contain them. "Then let me tell you a different truth," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Let me tell you that you are the most beautiful woman I have ever known, not because of any physical perfection, but because of the grace in your spirit, the kindness in your heart, the strength you show even when you believe yourself weak." "Nathaniel, please," she whispered, leaning into his touch despite herself. "You must understand, I cannot. They have arranged a marriage for me. If I refuse, they will destroy your family's livelihood. I cannot be the cause of such suffering." "What if I told you," Nathaniel said slowly, "that your stepmother's threats are not as powerful as she believes?" Something in his tone made Cordelia look at him more carefully. There was a confidence in his bearing that she had not noticed before, a quiet certainty that seemed at odds with their desperate circumstances. "What do you mean?" Nathaniel smiled, and the expression held secrets that made her heart race with something that felt dangerously like hope. "My full name is Nathaniel Hayes Thornfield. The land I work, I don't merely work it, Cordelia. I own it." The words hit her like a thunderbolt. She stared at him in shock, her mind struggling to process this revelation. But you said you were a farmer. You dress like a laborer. You work with your hands." "I am a farmer," he replied gently. "I choose to work my own land rather than hire others to do what I can do myself. My grandfather built that farm from nothing, and my father expanded it until it became one of the most prosperous in the county. When he died, he left it all to me. 300 acres of prime farmland, timber rights, and mineral deposits that provide more income than most of your stepmother's aristocratic friends could claim." Cordelia felt the world shift around her, as if everything she had believed about their circumstances had been rebuilt in an instant. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to know me as I truly am," Nathaniel explained. "Not as a title or a fortune, but as a man. When you looked at me, I saw no calculation in your eyes, no assessment of my worth based on my possessions. You saw me, Cordelia, just me, and that was more precious than any inheritance." Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from within the kitchen. Mary's voice carried through the partially open door. "Mrs. Ashworth is asking after Miss Cordelia, ma'am. Shall I tell her she's indisposed?" Panic shot through Cordelia's veins. If Helena discovered this meeting, all would be lost, regardless of Nathaniel's revelations about his true circumstances. "Come with me," Nathaniel said urgently, taking her hand. "Tonight. Now. We can be married by morning in the village church." Pastor Williams has known my family for decades. He'll perform the ceremony without question. I cannot simply disappear in the night, Cordelia protested, even as her heart leapt at the possibility he offered. Why not? His question was simple, direct, cutting through years of conditioning about duty and propriety. What holds you here except fear? What do you owe to people who have never shown you anything but cruelty? The footsteps in the kitchen were growing closer. Cordelia could hear Helena's voice now, sharp with impatience. Where is that ungrateful girl? Find her immediately. Choose, Cordelia, Nathaniel whispered, his hand extending toward her like a lifeline. Choose the life you deserve, not the one they would force upon you. For a moment, she stood frozen between two worlds, the familiar misery of submission and the terrifying possibility of freedom. Then, as Helena's voice grew closer still, something inside Cordelia's chest blazed to life. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she was worth more than they had ever allowed her to believe. Yes, she breathed, taking his hand. Yes, I choose you. I choose us. What followed was a blur of desperate flight and exhilarating freedom. They ran through the rain-soaked gardens, their footsteps muffled by wet grass. Nathaniel's horse waited beyond the estate gates, and he lifted Cordelia onto the saddle before mounting behind her, his arms encircling her waist as they rode through the night toward Millbrook Village. The ceremony was simple, witnessed by Pastor Williams and his wife in the small stone church where Cordelia had attended services all her life. But as she spoke her vows by candlelight, wearing her simple dress and holding Nathaniel's work-roughened hands, she felt more like a queen than she ever had in all her years at the manor. When they returned to Thornfield House the next morning, for Nathaniel's home deserved that grander title, Cordelia was amazed to discover a dwelling that rivaled Millbrook Manor in comfort and elegance. The furnishings spoke of prosperity, earned rather than inherited, and every room carried the warmth of a true home rather than a museum of family pretensions. The confrontation with Helena came, as they both knew it would. She arrived at Thornfield in her finest carriage, accompanied by Vivian and two male relatives clearly intended to intimidate. But when faced with the reality of Nathaniel's wealth and standing, confirmed by documents and deeds that proved his ownership of more land than the Ashworth estate encompassed, her rage transformed into speechless shock. "You have made a grave error," Helena declared, though her voice lacked its usual commanding tone. "This marriage can be annulled." Cordelia was not of sound mind. She was influenced by love, Cordelia said quietly, stepping forward to stand beside her husband. For the first time in her life, she felt no fear of her stepmother's anger, no need to shrink from confrontation. "I was influenced by love and by the recognition of my own worth." Vivian, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "You cannot seriously believe that this farmer is an appropriate match for an Ashworth." Nathaniel's response was delivered with the quiet confidence that Cordelia had come to treasure. "Actually, Miss Ashworth, the Thornfield family has been prominent in this county since before your father was born. If we're discussing appropriate matches, I believe your sister has married quite well indeed." Years later, when friends asked Cordelia to describe her wedding day, she would tell them not about the simple ceremony or the rain that fell like blessings on their heads. She would tell them about the moment she realized that true love didn't require her to diminish herself to be worthy of it. True love saw her exactly as she was and declared her perfect. In Nathaniel's eyes, she was never the plain, dowry-less daughter of Millbrook Manor. She was simply Cordelia, beloved, cherished, and treated with the reverence due to a queen. And in learning to see herself through his eyes, she discovered a truth that no amount of cruelty could ever diminish. She had always been worthy of love. She had simply needed someone brave enough to show her how to claim it. The autumn harvest that year was the most bountiful Thornfield had ever seen, And as Cordelia walked through the golden fields beside the man who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself, she understood at last what it meant to be truly home. Vivian's engagement to Edward Whitmore lasted exactly 3 months before scandal broke about debts the family had hidden and social graces that proved less charming upon closer inspection. But by then, Cordelia was far too busy building her own happiness to spare much thought for her sister's disappointed ambitions. Some stories end with kingdoms won or enemies vanquished. This one ended with something far more precious. A woman who learned that she was worth loving, and a love strong enough to prove it every single day.